Okay. And I also wanted to point out that of those nearly 600 completed, we've really only had one of those that stated a strong opinion about the Holloway House. We have had a few people talk to board members about, is there really any way to save it, or you really need to tear it down? But it was more, it wasn't really adamant opposition, but more or less trying to just gain information about the building. And that is why we have the open house at the Holloway House, because we wanted to invite people to have an opportunity to walk through the building and to gain firsthand experience and exposure to it. Okay. Last week we met with the architect that we have selected, Esterly Schneider and Associates Incorporated, out of Springfield. We're in the process of contracting with them, and they should have schematics and artist rendering by the 1st of next month, okay, so a month from today. And the fees for that initial work have been donated by an anonymous donor. And then I've included their email. Actually, I meant to put their website, but I put their email instead. So anyway, Esterly Schneider and Associates, they have a lot of experience in building senior centers, and that's going to be invaluable. We also met with them at the Holloway House because we wanted to give them an opportunity to look around the house, because we've had several people say, can you incorporate the Holloway House in your new center? So we wanted the architects to see this building firsthand, and we did talk about it, and they're mulling that over to see if they think that is even a feasible possibility. We have, within the last month or so, undertaken kind of quietly our capital campaign. We expect that construction costs will be $2 to $2.5 million. Our two separate focuses for capital campaign, one, and I think I mentioned this to you last time, listing the various amounts for naming opportunities, okay? So anyone listing with $500,000 that needs to go somewhere, that will name you a senior center. Okay, and then Joanne, who's a development professional, came up with another program that she calls 25 at 20. So we're looking at 25 donors at $20,000 a piece. That would garner us $500,000. And here at the outset of that, we've been at that maybe about a month, and we've already got 2 of those 25 identified. We have one of the in hand, actually. We do expect the grants to garner close to half of the monies that we need. And local visits with potential donors have been initiated. So basically what tonight's request is really kind of a reaffirmation from you that this site is an acceptable site for the city for us to move forward with. And the architect will probably be preparing their plans with that site in mind. And so what we would like to have from the City Council is really a final formal approval that this is the site that we can locate the senior center on.
Any questions for Greg?
That's it.
If not, would council be interested in a motion to reaffirm to the Senior Center Board to continue to progress with fundraising and grant applications?
I move it.
Second.
Motion made and second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you very much, and thank you for,
Well, thank you all. I appreciate
for
it.
all of them putting a lot of work into
Okay,
this
you
initiative.
bet. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is report of mayor and council reports of boards and commissions. There's 12 of them listed. Are there any questions? If not, moving on to old business. The first item is an ordinance amending section 3123 and 24 of the code pertaining to parks, the Parks Advisory Commission. Floyd?
So this revision adds the duties of the tree board to the Parks Advisory Commission and also expands that board from 5 members to 6. So we would ask that you would approve the final reading on that ordinance revision.
Any questions for Floyd? Jimmy Dale?
And looking around Rolla, I see the number of trees that we have already. What kind of monies are we getting for planting extra trees?
I don't know exactly how to answer that question, monies for finding extra trees. Yes, we do have a lot of trees. And being a Tree City USA essentially is a designation that says we are doing good tree maintenance of the existing trees that we have, and if we are planting them, we are following generally accepted recommendations of doing so. Does not obligate us to spend any more money than we are presently doing if we are meeting the threshold of the $2 per capita, which I'm firmly convinced we already are spending that amount of money in our regular, given our different entities, our regular duties of what we do with our tree care throughout the city anyway. Having the Parks Commission serve as the tree board merely gives them the ability to give us input from their members to say, okay, we would suggest that you do this. Just like we do any of our other pieces of our parks, whether it's splash zone or the cemetery or playgrounds or whatever, we try to vet that with them before we come before you. But doing this process really doesn't obligate us necessarily to spend money. Now, I think there is some merit of doing a tree inventory in terms of assessing the current trees that we have, in terms of the safety, particularly as it relates to the health and longevity of tree X or whatever, that they're not going to cause a problem at some point down the road, literally falling on the road or some such like that on the property that we maintain. But again, that's I see that as something over here. Really, it's kind of a separate piece that gives us the ability to do that, should we want to do that. And by being a Tree City USA, it increases our funding mechanism if we apply for grants that basically says that at that point, then we would get 75% funding from the Arbor Foundation, and we, the city, would only have to come up with 25%. If we're a Tree City USA, it's 60-40 otherwise if we're not. So there's that. But there's nothing that says you have to apply for a grant. It merely says you can do so for things like educating your staff. If you're planning and you're doing a tree planting for X reasons, then that may be eligible for reimbursement if you can show that you've spent X amount of money. We have those projects going on all the time anyway, that you are well aware of. We parks, I'm speaking for us, we plant memorial trees along the trail. Those kind of things would be part of that. So I just see this as another opportunity for us to really improve our education and tell people what we're already doing, quite frankly. And this piece of it, empowering the Parks Commission to serve as the city's tree board and essentially represent you, the citizens and the council, is just another step in that process. So I gave you a long-winded answer. I hope that addressed what you were asking.
Jimmy Dale, I think it's not just a plaque on the wall, but it's providing some expertise now to how we trim. I mean, let's be honest, sometimes we hack, we don't trim. A couple years ago in the PAL edition, I remember, and I don't know if it was Public Works or RMU, it was RMU because they're not here, but we just went down the street and whoosh, so now you got a trunk with branches on one side and nothing on the other. I think that's the intent of having a tree board and putting somebody on there with expertise to help us with that. It's not about spending money to buy more
Throughout
billboard.
the county, though.
What's that?
They're doing that throughout the county.
Hacking?
Yes.
Well, go to the commission meeting then.
I mean, if you get out in the county, you'll see where inter-county and people like that, they're going through and they're just hacking one side off and
I know, but it's someone here, I don't know if it was Jacob or Daniel, there are ways to trim trees and right ways and wrong ways, and I think that's what we're trying to do.
Maybe we can be a good example.
Any other questions? Final reading?
An ordinance amending Article 4, Parks and Recreation Commission, Sections 31-23 and 31-24 of the General Ordinances of the City of Rolla, Missouri, known as the Code of the City of Rolla, Missouri, pertaining to the Parks Advisory Commission.
ordinance passed.
Second.
Motion made and second, roll call vote.
Crown,
Yes.
Schott,
Yes.
Reuter,
Yes.
Schneider,
Yes.
Murphy,
Yes.
Henry,
Yes.
Williams,
Yes.
Muse,
Yes.
Roder,
Yes.
Everly,
Yes.
Allen,
Yes.
11 A's.
Next item is an ordinance authorizing me to enter into a ground lease with Sullivan Aviation.
We've been discussing this for a little while, but this group is interested in building a corporate hangar at the airport in an area right behind our 10-unit T hangar. They have an arrangement with Air Methods, who is providing the helicopter services for the hospital, at least under another 5-year term. So they don't, at this point, need a taxiway extension, though they did consent to build the taxiway if at any time down the road they deemed that they need to have an airplane to be able to access this property. This is a small piece of property that would open up some future corporate hangars. We're proposing a 40-year lease where the building would revert to the city at the end of that 40-year term, starting at $1,200 a year and indexed annually. So we see this as another fine way to see improvements in activity at the airport. Ultimately, the city would benefit from this building and a good client that is buying a lot of fuel from us. So we're recommending a final approval of this lease.
Any questions? If not, can we have the final reading?
An ordinance authorizing the mayor of the City of Rolla, Missouri to execute on behalf of the City of Rolla, Missouri, a certain hangar ground lease between the City of Rolla, Missouri and Sullivan Airport LLC.
Ordinance passed.
Second.
Motion made and second, roll call vote.
Everly,
Yes.
Allen,
Yes.
Murphy,
Yes.
Williams,
Yes.
Schneider,
Yes.
Reuter,
Yes.
Muse,
Yes.
Henry,
Yes.
Crown,
Yes.
Schott,
Yes.
Roder,
Yes.
11 A's.
Moving on to new business, the only item tonight is an ordinance to consider changing Chapter 42 of the section dealing with medical marijuana facilities.
So
John?
I'll give an overview, and then I think the mayor can sort of lay out what the options are before us. And unfortunately, this is one of those issues that we thought on June 3rd, with a lot of public input, a lot of discussion between planning and zoning and city council. The council unanimously approved an ordinance that basically established a 500-foot spacing between medical marijuana dispensaries and churches, schools, and daycares. And that was as a result of a lot of compromise. We used the definition it's referenced in state law dealing with liquor license, so we specifically added the language in our distance definition in a method consistent with the city's existing liquor license measurement standard, which isn't really spelled out anywhere in city code or in state statute, but we have traditionally defined that as being from building to building as a crow flies, a straight line between two buildings, and have applied that in several cases where we've granted liquor licenses. So that's what was really adopted on June 3rd. Just before that took effect on June 3rd, Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services came out with their new emergency rules on sort of all things dispensary related, and they stated that measurements shall be made along the shortest path between the demarcation points that can be lawfully traveled by foot. We had never heard that before. We had never seen that. And on the surface, that wouldn't seem to make a big difference in the way we defined distance or spacing until you sort of look at it on the map. And the effect of the 500-foot, at least as it affected the downtown area, the result was that as you now walk it from corner to corner, basically along sidewalks as the public would walk, the effect is that it pulls that distance back to some degree. While we had virtually taken out, and I have to say almost all of downtown, because even in the ordinance we passed had small pockets in the downtown that were still available, but by and large took out the vast majority of downtown, This one now opens up some areas, particularly between the 6th and 7th block on Pine Street and the block of Alex, and I hate to call out Alex's, but the block of Alex's Pizza becomes open as you have to now travel in basically 90-degree turns rather than as a straight line. So, there's a couple of ways that we can approach it, but we have prepared an ordinance that adopts, as an amendment to what the council adopted on June 3rd, that uses the state's definition and then allows it, at least for tonight's purposes, open for the council to consider whether they want to enlarge that 500-foot spacing. Don't have to do that. It's worth pointing out that the spacing has some interesting ramifications. In the downtown area, it actually reduces the effectiveness. Almost everywhere else, it increases the effectiveness because it now deems a standalone facility to be their property. So if you look at the high school, if you look at Green Tree, if you look at St. Patrick's, a lot of our churches on big properties, you're now going from the corner of their parking lots rather than from the building as we were defining the 100-foot spacing. So it does have a difference as to whether we're talking about closed confines like the downtown area and the larger areas that are out throughout the community in our C2 and C3 commercially zoned properties. So just on the assumption that council was going to look at some options, we have prepared an ordinance. We actually placed in the paper a public hearing notice for July 15th, only because a public hearing has a 15-day notice requirement. We wanted to meet that if council decides they want to go that route. If you decide not to go that route, stay with what we've adopted, then we simply cancel that public hearing. So with that, I think maybe the mayor wants to talk a little bit about options, and then we can discuss this.
Okay, so we essentially have four options. The first option is to keep the ordinance as it's written, so that's the 500-foot buffer between church, school, daycares, and a dispensary, or I should say an infuser as well. It also allows, by right, a dispensary or infuser in a C2, C3, or CC, Center City zoning area. The implications, if we keep that, is we may get challenged by the state or a citizen on that definition of measurement, how we have it, which will put the burden on us to test that theory of our ability of a local government to regulate time, place, and manner. The second option is to change the current ordinance to reflect the state's method of calculations, or measurements, I should say. We are then less likely to get challenged, but it has implications. As John said, it'll create more opportunities downtown for dispensaries, but in other areas, particularly those with large parking lots, it'll change that dynamic significantly. So instead of measuring from the door of the high school, you're now going to be measuring from the edge of the parking lot type of thing. So there's implications with that. A third option would be to change the ordinance to reflect the state's method of measurement, so we could lessen that opportunity, if you will, to be challenged on that definition. But then you could change that buffer if your goal was to sort of be neutral between what you passed originally and this. We're saying 600 feet, might be 650, it might be something else, but you would change the method of measurement and the buffer to sort of wash all that out to be consistent with what the citizens wanted and what the consensus was at the last meeting. The last option, and we really haven't talked much about this, but in the last week or so, I've had a number of people specifically ask me, why did you do anything? Why didn't you just do nothing and let the state's amendment and the state's rules carry the day? Which is an option. We could void our ordinance and fall back on that, in which case there would be no challenges because we're consistent with the state. But there are implications of doing that. That implication would be then a 1,000-foot buffer between church, school, and daycare, no buffer between dispensaries or infusers. The market would determine the hours of operation. And then they would be allowed in C2, C3, CC, and conditionally in C1 as well. So it would open up another one of those zoning classifications. And the reason for that is, correct me if I'm wrong, John, but we would then have to view the dispensaries like we would a pharmacy. So basically the land use of what would apply to a pharmacy would then apply here as well. So those are the four options. We'd like council to give us a good, strong indication of where you want to go, so we could proceed, if we're going to do any changes whatsoever, the idea would be to have a public hearing, have a first reading tonight, and a public hearing, and take action on the next one. And what's driving the timeline is those folks that have to put applications in are going to invest an awful lot of money and an awful lot of effort, and they have to have all those in by August 3rd. So that's the time crunch that we're on. So Lance is available to give opinions on some of these legalities. So with that, let the discussion begin.
Can we get his opinion first?
Of which,
So I'd like to get your opinion on either sticking with the state or sticking with what we got, the crow flies, or going with the state, in terms of what you think the legal ramifications for the city would be.
I feel firmly resolute in the idea that cities were given an absolute right to regulate time, distance, and manner of operation. That was written into the Constitution of the state of Missouri. That amendment is not just passed by the legislature, it is now the highest law in the land for the state of Missouri. So I don't believe the regulation that is passed by Department of Health supersedes our authority to dictate that distance. I would make the analogy that would be like we say 500 feet, and then they come in and write a regulation that says, okay, but now a foot is 10 inches. That doesn't make sense. If you have the right to establish distance, then you also have to have the right to define what that distance is. I think we've done a pretty good job of showing what our intent as to distance was with those maps, and we have done the best that we can to define that distance. So I think we can leave it that way. If we get challenged, literally you could be challenged going in either direction. You could do something tonight and be challenged. You could not do anything tonight and be challenged. I think the question is how the manner in which the council feels most comfortable. The most conservative approach, the approach that brings us the least likely challenge, is if we accept the state's definition of what that distance is, and then describe, if we wanted it to be to this point, now that we've defined what that point is, or how we're going to measure to that point, then you can go the X number of feet to that point. That's the most conservative approach. But that's up to the council to decide. I do believe that the city has the ability to define what that distance is, and I think that the Department of Health's authority under the Constitution is to define how you go about applying for those licenses and getting those businesses, and I don't think that has anything to do with measuring the distance.
As a follow-up, do you think that it would make a difference if the city was adopting the 1,000 and sticking with that versus something under that?
Yes, and I understand, because we did speak prior to this. So I think we would be obligated to follow that definition if it was staying at 1,000 feet, because the state has defined 1,000 feet as a very specific requirement. We can't go beyond 1,000 feet. So that to me makes sense. But when they follow that with, but a city may then go less than that, which the city of Rolla has at least presently done, all we were doing was defining what in less than 1,000 feet. And I think the method of calculating that is fully vested in the city.
So just to clarify, your legal opinion would be that if it's stated 1,000, the city kept it at 1,000, they would need to stick with the state rules. Whereas if a city decided to lessen it and allow 700, 500, 300, anything different, then they would be more able to follow whatever definition they'd like to attach to that.
Correct.
John?
What about, I mean, if we change the method, but can we eliminate say CC, and that would take the Pine Street area totally out of it. Leave, change the method of measurement to the state recommended method, and then remove CC zoning.
We could, here's the problem with removing CC zoning.
Okay.
We have cumulative zoning, so what's allowed in C1 is by right in C2, what's allowed in C2 by right in C3. What's in CC by definition in our ordinances currently allows everything commercially. So we would have to go back through planning and zoning and city council, and council could, in CC, specifically say pharmacies or anything related would not be allowed in CC, but it's got to be a text change. Because right now CC says you can do everything else it's allowed in other commercial zones.
So it seems as if, again, we're up against a time deadline so that people who are going to apply for these know what they're applying for in our city. After hearing the counselors' thoughts, I think I would be very comfortable in leaving it what we did. We heard from a lot of people in the community. We made a decision that we thought reflected the best that we could, what people were willing to accept and wanted. And it seems that we would be making a lot of trouble for ourselves if we tried to do something different than that at this point. So to me, it makes more sense, given the counselors' thoughts, to stick with what we decided and let's see how the chips fall.
I second that.
I third that.
I would add,
Okay, but we got one little thing to tidy up, and you want to talk about the liquor?
yeah.
Okay.
So we can do that. We don't have a very good definition of how we determine spacing under our liquor license. All we do is refer to the state law. The state law simply says it's 100 foot. It provides in the state law that cities can go up to 300 foot for liquor license. But there's also an unusual kind of clause in that section of the statutes that say the city council can actually grant an exception to it. It could actually penetrate that 100 foot spacing as long as they notify all the adjacent property owners and give them opportunity in public hearing to speak that. The problem is our definition nor the state's currently under liquor licenses defined whether we're doing it by walk or straight line or some other method. So I would suggest if we want to do that, stay with what we passed on June 3rd. Then we go back into the liquor license requirement,
Yeah.
not into chapter 42, into liquor licenses and just clarify the process we use for how liquor licenses are established. And I think we'd be fine.
Sounds good.
Rachel?
Yeah, because actually that was sort of the question I wanted to ask Lance. Does that legal analysis change if we do not revise and encode specifics for a liquor license? Otherwise, we're just a circular definition that doesn't go anywhere.
It's an interesting discussion. To me, and I think to most people, you define distance as in point A to point B, which is what we've always done. The closest point of a building to the next closest point
Yes.
of a building, which is what we've always done. That is distance. Now, we didn't define that, but some certain things don't necessarily have to be defined. It would be best if we went ahead and put that definition. But from point A to point B is always going to be, that's distance. And so that is the most appropriate method if it's never been an issue.
Okay.
Ann?
My question is that the business people that are wanting to apply for these applications, are they going to first come to Rolla and ask what our parameters are? Or are they going to follow the state definition of distance?
Listen, I haven't read the application over. I do understand that they, and tell me if anyone else has heard differently, that they're asking within the application to prove that you're following, if it's different than the state rules, how you're following the city's rules. For example, if some city lowers it to 700, 300, 500, how are you then following the way that they're defining it?
Okay.
Is that what anyone else has understood?
The business should do due diligence and make sure their application is accurate.
My understanding is that when they file their application, if it deviates, they are supposed to show some sort of documentation that allows that the location fits the city's rules, if it's less than 1,000 feet.
And I suspect they'll ultimately want to see something in writing from the city on that. For a liquor license, for instance, the state won't issue a state liquor license until the city has given them a letter saying that, this property meets the requirements of code. So I suspect we'll need to do, they're not going to rely just on the applicant to verify. The city will have to take some kind of an action that this particular location is in compliance with our ordinances. So if we do that, we would not use the ordinance, of course, that's in your packet tonight, which was only changing to the state definition, but we would prepare an ordinance that would clarify the definition of distance in liquor license. But we'd submit that at the next city council meeting, which would be July 15th. We would ask at that point, if you're going to consider that, you consider that an emergency and do a first and final reading on that so that it's firmed up before the August 3rd. We don't have another council meeting until August 5th, so.
Seems reasonable. I think I should probably, I have had conversation with at least one person, one citizen contacted me on behalf of the city and said that if we don't follow the state's regulations, that they would seek redress through the courts. Whether or not they do that or not, I can't answer, but he asked specifically that I make you aware that if we don't follow the state's code of regulations, then he intends to pursue it. I think that's a possibility regardless of which way you act.
I'm not concerned, we have an excellent counselor, so. Bring it.
Second.
Okay, so we didn't have the first read. Any other questions, first of all? If there,
Just like to apologize to the staff who did all the work on this ordinance that we're not going to use now.
yeah, since we didn't have first reading, and I'm not going to ask for a motion to not take action, right, Lance?
Correct.
So basically, maybe just a show of hands, do you want us to prepare for the next meeting a revision to the ordinance on liquor permits? Okay, there you go.
Do you want to have a public hearing on that, or no? You don't have to.
No.
Yeah.
Say no.
Okay. My God, look at that.
Hey, that was
That was better than I thought.
So, we're moving on. Next item is claims and/or fiscal transactions. First item is a motion awarding the bid for Project 463 to concrete project.
So staff opened bids for project 463. It's for concrete work on 10th Street. Don Magai Incorporated was rated as low bid. This project will consist of curb and gutter and driveways and sidewalks on 10th Street from approximately 63 Bishop Avenue to Phelps Health. So staff recommends motion for bid award to the low bidder, Don Magai Incorporated, for $251,367.75. And we're also asking for a first reading of ordinance entered into a contract for the same.
Any questions for Darren?
Yes, sir.
Jimmy
Yes.
Dale?
Went through this before, Mayor, and you know what I'm talking about.
No, I don't.
Yes, you do.
No, I
Sit
don't.
there and tell me you don't know. I'm looking at the difference in the bid. It's $130,000. Is there a reason for that?
The only answer I've got is, St.
Huh?
Louis contractor.
As we went through this before, on bids like this, and I don't want to see any change orders on the bid. And
I
wanna
can't
see-
make any promise we
Well,
don't have any change
but I still
orders.
want to, the
That's,
change orders, I want to see them.
We-
I want to say it's 10%, is it not?
Yeah.
Yeah, 10%, staff has to come back to get approval.
Correct.
You could have 20 of them at 9%, buddy.
No, no,
Where
in the-
we
no,
at?
no, no, in the aggregate, in the aggregate.
Well, no, the
It's
ordinance.
10% on one, 20% in aggregate.
Yeah,
Actually, it's 10% individual, 25% aggregate.
25, you're right,
Yeah.
sorry.
25%.
But I mean, this is a pretty defined project, and it's going to have quantities. I mean, there's, sort of us
I would
changing
imagine we
something
would
the
come
field.
in plus or minus 5%.
Well, I can understand there's some circumstances, but I'm not really questioning the amount of money. But what I am questioning is the difference.
I mean, my estimate prior to bid opening was 250,000. We budgeted 275, and we were right in line with what we budgeted and what my estimate was.
All right, that's fine. You answered my question, but I just.
If there's no other questions, Jimmy Dale, would you like to make a motion?
So moved. Thank you,
Yeah,
buddy.
read it.
You're a nice guy,
No,
Mayor,
no.
but I will
Motion
make
to
a
award.
move.
Award
Oh,
first.
that's right.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Did you make a motion to
Make a
approve?
motion.
To award the
Second.
bid? Motion made and second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? First reading.
An ordinance authorizing the mayor of the city of Rolla, Missouri to execute on behalf of the city of Rolla, Missouri, certain agreement between the city of Rolla, Missouri and Donald Magi Incorporated for 10th Street Concrete Project Number 463.
Moving on to citizen communication, is there anyone that would like to speak to city council?
Qualified as a citizen. Hey, everybody. Just wanted to give a real quick reminder of the schedule change for this week since we have a holiday on Thursday. This one tends to throw a little bit more of a curve to our residents that are impacted. So if your normal trash and recycling collection day is Thursday, since our shift day is Wednesday, we'll have to shift that to Wednesday. So it'll occur a day earlier, and that's a little bit tricky for people. So if you're able to spread that word, please do. The Thursday collection folks will be the only ones impacted.
And Brett, I know we've sent out press releases, and
Yep.
Facebook has had that posted.
Right.
Did we ever take advantage of Everbridge? That effort, I don't know.
We looked at that and tried that once, but the response was pretty disappointing. We could always try it again, but we just didn't really get much of a result.
So Thursday pickup is generally what area, or do you know approximately what wards?
That's my area, leave it alone.
Yeah, and a couple months ago, we shifted that line, but essentially, it's going to be the southwest section of town. Okay? Thank you.
Any other citizen comments? Mayor and the city council comments, I have two. The first one, I want to take a chance to brag on some of our staff. 2 weeks ago, I was in Lewiston, Idaho, which is very much up by the Canadian border, and I went through this little airport from Lewiston, and I got talking to the manager there, and I told him where I was from, and for the next 20 minutes, he raved about Rolla and the Rolla National Airport and the management out there. This person had the contract with the Forestry Service, I guess, to do these prescribed burns. So once a year, he bases helicopters down there at our airport. But he was just raving at the friendliness and the professionalness and the accommodation that our staff shows to people outside of town. So it was really nice to hear from somebody so far away that really spoke highly of Rolla. So to Darren and the rest of the crew out there, great job. I also would like to ask Steve to introduce our new employee. He could have figured out all of this medical marijuana stuff for us.
Okay, the Community Development Department is proud to announce the arrival of our new city planner, Tom Coots. He has over 14 years' experience in planning and zoning, and he has a wealth of knowledge, and we are very proud to have him.
I'll say hello to y'all. I look forward to working with y'all.
Welcome.
One last comment, again, on the airport. I don't know how many got a chance to go out and see the Ford Tri-Motor, but, once again, there was a good crowd of people there, and the people that organized that, which was the Experimental Aircraft Association, They come from far and wide, and there was a lot of very good comments about airport and airport management as well. So it's quite a neat little plane. Any council comments? Staff comments? Jody? Lions Club, buy tickets.
Yes. Well, I'm not don't care so much about the tickets, but the Lions Club Carnival is this week, so there will be lots of traffic and lots of people crossing 63 and lots of stuff happening, and so just be careful driving in that Lions Club vicinity, and everybody go out and have a good time and don't get overheated.
And Jody, that's Wednesday to Saturday, right?
Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Yep.
Jimmy Dale?
I have a couple. Can you tell me what's going on with the Sonic property?
The what?
Sonic property?
I don't know, Steve, we got any kind
Somewhere
of update?
between slow and stop, I think.
Well, something needs to be done.
We built a highway in the town that time they've moved dirt, so.
Well, they need to do something. I mean, they're not even taking care of their debris barriers, and they need to really look at those.
Their
They're worse
permit has a
away.
time limit on it. Don't you have to do something within a year?
They do. I believe I had to check my look, but they have 3 years. Otherwise, the vacation alley is not valid. Still have not submitted a set of drawings. Still have no permit.
Well, it's a mess over there. I mean, the weeds have grown up and everything else, and it's not very.
Well, we
conducive.
can do something about the weeds and that. I'll have her go by tomorrow.
I worry about the runoff. There's not a lot of vegetation there.
I don't know.
Well,
again, I can't
they
say.
fixed it once, but that big heavy rain we've got since then, it's worse down at the bottom on the east side of the corner down there. with the church.
We'll take a look at it.
While you're up there, I didn't get a chance to drive past Elliott today. Is that fixed?
No.
No. The judge didn't give him a fine. He I think they're allowing him 30 days to get it cleaned up. So,
Went to the end of the month, sir. I checked on it.
Okay. So on the 30th day, what happens?
I guess we issue another summons. I don't know. It's right now, I don't know that the judge give him any ultimatums. I think it just give him 30 days.
I think it's a shame what those neighbors have to go through,
I agree.
so. Thanks, Steve. Any other council comments?
I still got another one there. I haven't finished, sir. I had a couple of calls, and we'd like to know if Friday's going to be a holiday.
Not planning it.
County
I don't know what the 4th
and
and 5th of July is.
a couple other places have said Friday's going to be a holiday.
So the state of Missouri, we basically say if the banks are open, we're open. And the plan right now is to be open for business on
Would
Friday.
you call the banks and tell them that a lot of people called want a holiday for Friday? Yeah.
I don't think we should willy-nilly make days off like that. I think that if that's
Well,
what we want, then I think we go through the compensation process and evaluate
I
it.
brought it to your attention, which I was asked to do, sir.
Any other council comments? Jimmy Dale?
I am through, sir.
A lot of rain, a lot of weeds.
Well, let me tell you what, I will say thank you to the people out there because they've been doing a good job. There's still a few places out there that are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, but their names and numbers are down, and so they're gonna be turned in this week.
David?
I had a couple things. One is actually right along with Jimmy Dale said. I also got a couple calls from employees that are in my ward about this. So I just wanted to kind of piggyback and say, yeah, it sounds like our employees would appreciate that. I wasn't sure. I know we gave Columbus Day recently. Is that one that the banks recognize? They do recognize that.
Well, I don't know that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, correct me if I'm wrong, but that monster of a personnel manual we have has the vacation days in it.
Correct.
Okay, so why is this even being discussed?
I think what happened was, what I heard from one of the employees was that the state, Governor Parsons, gave Friday as a kind of extra holiday based on the fact that the 4th was on Thursday, so then 5th, 6th, kind of a long weekend, so little bit of a benefit and an extra thing for our employees to have a long weekend when they maybe wouldn't otherwise, so. If there's anything could be done to look into that more, I understand that, like you said, budgetarily wise, it's some implications as well, so. But I also wanted to bring it forward and mention that I've heard from some constituents, not just employees, but they're my constituents that were interested. I have a couple questions for Public Works. I don't know if you'd be willing to come up, whoever that would be. I mean, I can tell you what their issues.
Steve's sitting daring up.
Okay. So I'll start mentioning one. It was a email I got from a constituent about micro sealing on Johnson Laird. You may have heard, maybe they've called you too, but for some reason Keeney Court didn't get done, probably because it's on a different schedule than the rest of it. But they were upset to see Johnson Laird done, the whole area all brand new, looks great, except the Keeney Court wasn't. Do you know anything about it?
I haven't got a call. I'd have to check into it. I mean,
Okay.
we do them on a cycle. My
Right.
guess is Keeney Court wouldn't do yet, but I'd have to check
Wasn't
into
it?
it.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. If it's within a year or two, sometimes do you guys conglomerate it with the project that's right there?
Sometimes, but
Okay.
not most time, no. We try to kind of stick to that schedule.
Stick to the schedule. If you'd be able to look that one up,
Yep.
it's the Keeney Court. I think they did Johnson Laird. Just, I could at least give this constituent a feedback that, hey, it's on next year's schedule, sorry, but
Yep.
or whatever it would be. The other issue I wanted to bring up, and I know we've kind of run it over and over, I have a personal feeling, but I'm bringing forward a constituent issue. A constituent has called me twice about the new Holloway Road between the tennis courts and 18th Street. This was before, I think, that the line was painted, and they were concerned that, hey, are they wide enough for fire trucks and whatever? And I've talked with Steve and yourself a few times that, of course, you guys designed this to be wide enough for trucks and everything else. But a week later, they called me and said, actually, I was run off the road by a truck in that location. They had a police come and the police report given by the Rolla PD. And so he was just following up and saying, actually, after that happened, after I mentioned it, something did actually happen to me. So I just told him that I would bring it forward. Since then, I do believe we've gotten the yellow line on there. So I had mentioned to him myself that I thought that would make a difference when people can clearly see which side they need to be on and how much space they have.
And I'd be curious, I mean, I know we'd passed the no parking and it took a
Right.
little time for people to get used to that. You know, I'd be curious if, you know, maybe somebody was still parked on the street when that happened or something.
Right.
You don't have any details of when that
It doesn't sound like
happened.
anybody was parked on the street. I think it was
Okay.
just a truck maybe kind of cut that corner a little odd or something like that. But
Right.
I just wanted to bring it forward, and he mentioned as a solution, I don't know how possible it would be, but even just a sign there that would say something like no trucks and try to get them to go around a route that would be more maybe amenable to trucks. I think Steve's told me before, even if they put that up, it doesn't mean anybody's going to follow it or not. It's hard to enforce, but maybe it would at least deter folks that are honest. I don't know. Just an idea.
Sure.
So if you could look into that, let me know too. Just I could let the constituent know. But, two other quick
What kind of
things.
truck was it?
I can find out. I can't remember if it was he said truck, so I don't know if that was tractor trailer or more like a dump truck. But
Okay.
I'll be able to find out more. The police did take a report, so I'm sure they
Okay.
have a bunch of information. And the other thing I wanted to bring up, and I've spoken with John and the mayor both about this, is the fact that sometimes any one of us on council might have an obligation out of town, and actually, this is not for you anymore, so thank you.
Hold on, Darren, don't run off. I got another question.
Why don't you hold
Okay,
his,
sure,
so
go ahead.
poor Darren doesn't
Yeah,
sit
poor
there.
Darren.
Go ahead, Darren.
Size of the sidewalks going in on 10th Street,
Yes,
are they normal size?
they'll match about what's there now. I mean, there's wide sidewalk there now, is why I'm saying that.
No.
One
Well,
side,
no. We're not putting 6-foot sidewalks in there again, buddy.
10.
where we're putting 5 on one side, 10 on the other.
But we have, you're saying we have an 8 or 10?
I think it's an 8 now, yes, on the one
That's
side.
ridiculous.
It's already part of our bike trail system.
But see, that's wrong. That's wrong. Bicycles were not meant to ride on the damn sidewalks. That's wrong. Can't believe that.
That's your chance, Darren, to sit
All
down.
right.
Thanks, man.
Well, it's wrong. It really is, Mayor, you know it.
So the other couple things I had.
I've been getting a lot of complaints too about it, but I think when you buy into the walkability and the bikeability program, you're buying into some of these
I'm
things.
gonna tell you what. Wait till one of them gets hit flying off of these sidewalks out there, they're coming off of and they're running right out in the front. If a guy hadn't have noticed the car coming and really made a quick turn, he would have been mush all over the sidewalk, all over the street out there. Because he'd run right out in front of that guy's car, and the guy just happened to see him, and the guy on the bicycle made a quick, flat turn and got out of the way. He was lucky.
So do we need bigger sidewalks? Is 10 feet?
He
Is 10
come off of the sidewalk.
10 feet's
buddy.
not enough?
Well, evidently, they didn't think the sidewalk was big enough.
I think people can use a bicycle safety course. It amazes me on our walking trails, and I don't care if we have that fluorescent sign in the middle of the road or not. It amazes me how many people come off those trails and go right across without even stopping and looking. But one day, they'll get some sense knocked into them. David?
I can't believe that we're widening our sidewalks and changing the size of our streets to make them narrow. So it's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, but 10th Street has a lot of traffic, Jimmy Dale, with trucks and cars. I mean,
I don't care if it's got 50,000
Yeah.
people a day on it, Mayor.
but that's
It's ridiculous.
But that's a tough street to say to people, ride your bike in the street. I understand what you're saying on the off-streets, and I would agree with you on this off-street. But on something like 10th Street, there's a lot of traffic there.
There's a lot of traffic on 72. I see 5, 6, 7 people riding it down 72, getting and going clear out on 72 out there. That's what streets were made for, was to ride on, not bicycles.
So the other things I wanted to bring up were the fact that sometimes someone on council's out of town, and I've looked into it with John and the mayor, the fact that it is within state law to be able to do like a teleconferencing type thing, as long as the person is visible on the teleconference screen. So I just wanted to kind of bring it up to see if that's something we could look into, find out what it would take, and move forward with that.
Yeah, and we've talked about this in the past. We're looking at ways of tying it into the Fidelity system. It used to be that as long as you just had an audio, that was sufficient. Now it requires full participation. So the absent council member has to be able to hear everything that's being said, both at this podium and at council and the public would need to hear everything that he's saying. So it's doable. We've found cities that have found ways of doing it. Our challenge is not going to be we can have a Skype set up somehow, but being able to plug that audio two-way in is going to be a little bit of a challenge. So we just haven't figured it out yet, but we're talking to cities that have. There are some technologies out there that this can't be all that radical. So the law allows for that form of participation, but my suggestion was, David, before we do that, make sure the council is all aware of that. It could be awkward to have 3 or 4 Skype screens in if people are missing. We've had plenty of council meetings where we've had 3, 4, 5 people missing. So just know if we do that, it's going to change the character of the room and the meetings. So it's sort of a side conversation. I think we do need to adopt a policy on this. I don't think it needs to be bound up or we don't need to delay it. But I think we ought to lay out what our expectation is for participation in the council meeting. So we'll bring back something for consideration.
The other, yep, sorry.
go ahead.
I just had 2 other quick things. One, I just wanted to mention that folks at home asking us to speak up. I did notice, I did have a comment from someone who I think we're getting a little scratchy on some of the ones that don't have the mic cover, so I don't know if we can look into getting a few more. Looks like we need 4 mic covers, because I think otherwise it ends up with a bit of a scratchy tone. And then the last thing I wanted to mention, this was something that kind of took place on email this last week. The new car wash over by Bueller Park. There was some complaints about the noise from some folks that were using the park, and the car wash was approached, I think through the mayor and John, about potentially putting some silencers on some of their air machines and some of the things they've got, and it sounds like they jumped at the at hearing that, and we're willing to make some changes. So I just wanted to let everybody know in the community that we're appreciative for them, any business that sees there's an issue and willing to step forward without us having to ask much farther. So thanks to, what's the name of the business? The
Tiger Wash.
Tiger Wash for doing that.
Could take 3 to 4 weeks to get those installed. They were back ordered and they thought it might take that long, so.
Yeah. And the reality is, we couldn't have forced them anyway.
Right.
So it was great that they stepped up.
Yeah.
Matthew?
I saw in the news, I guess yesterday, that Illinois became, I don't remember which number of state, but there's a large number of states that are passing tobacco 21, which is basically raising the age limit on tobacco smoking to 21. What I thought was interesting about it, so we have the medical marijuana issue where you have to be 21 to purchase marijuana, and in Missouri we allow 18-year-olds to purchase tobacco, which I guess philosophically I may have issues with that, but in actuality I think with everything else we allow 18-year-olds to, I think that's okay. But what I was wondering was, as it sort of relates to the medical marijuana, what are we doing in Rolla to enforce the under 18 purchase of tobacco and tobacco products? My understanding also under state law that tobacco, vaping is not considered a tobacco product. So I don't know that there's an age restriction necessarily on vaping, but if not, is that something we can do locally? And I'd also like to know how often we've enforced the buying of tobacco by minors, or if we're even doing that in this town.
Let Chief do that, because I think we do have undercover cases. What was the first question you asked?
Basic in regards to vaping, it's my understanding, and I could be wrong, that vaping, that under Missouri law, tobacco does not include vaping. And so because there's that distinction, because vaping is nicotine, it's not tobacco, that it's not regulated like tobacco.
You have to be 18 years old to purchase any kind of a vaping.
Okay. So what, if any, enforcement have we done on this?
You know, we were doing some pretty radical enforcement. We had police explorers that were 17 years old, and we were sending them into these different things, trying to purchase both cigarettes and vaping products. But the explorers are actually run through the Boy Scouts, and the Boy Scouts they said we could not use explorers to do that in capacity as a police explorer. We are researching to see if we can just use them in the capacity of a citizen helping out the police department.
So when was the last time we did one of these?
Oh, it's been at least a year since the scouts told not to do it. Okay. The problem is, you know, they have to actually be underage. I mean, I got policemen that look 12 years old, there's no doubt about that. And I could send them in there, but they're actually 23 years old, so there's no law violation. We have to have a violation for us to be able to enforce it.
So you need some high school students to basically volunteer.
That's kind of what we're looking at right now. We're trying to find something that we can do that, but they have to be willing to go and testify if the if the business decides that they want to fight the ticket.
What is the punishment on the business?
It's just a fine.
Misdemeanor.
It's through our city courts, a fine. So.
Yeah.
I know Prevention Consultants does have a program where they will get high school students to volunteer, and they'll go in different stores, and this is throughout Dent County, Phelps County, and they'll make a sweep. And if the clerk sells to them, then they send something in, and they get I don't know what happens to.
I don't know if the city does anything with their business license.
Who gets the summons in that case? The
business owner, no, the person who actually sold the product is the one that gets the summons.
That seems backwards. It ought to be the business that gets the summons. Anyway, thank you. I was just curious because with the medical marijuana being such a big deal, and then thinking about tobacco and how we are looser with tobacco, which I would think some of my colleagues, if they were here tonight, would point out that marijuana has many medicinal uses, but I don't know of any for tobacco.
I also wanted to state that if we stop a person underage and we find that they're in possession of tobacco product, we will seize it and they will get a ticket for that also. That's about as much as we are allowed to do, as far as that goes.
You know, I remember the last time that Prevention Consultants did that sweep, it had surprisingly good compliance. There were a couple of violators in there that were prosecuted, but by and large, I want to say it was like 19 to 21 places. So the stores are pretty serious about that. My suggestion was if there's a reason for anybody to think that there's a place that's being lax in it, it's easier for us to focus on that than to try and do something just randomly blanket. So, same thing with alcohol. If you know of a place that, you know, you find out that the high schoolers are finding a place for alcohol, that's an easier target than.
Yeah, if somebody gives us a complaint, we will find somebody to go in there and do that for both the tobacco products and the alcohol.
Thank you.
Any other comments? If not, we have several items, all real estate related, for closed session. Is there a motion to go into closed session for real estate?
Moved.
Second.
Motion made and second, roll call vote.
Schneider,
Yay.
Roder,
Yes.
Reuter,
Yes.
Williams. Murphy,
Yes.
Schott, Proud,
Yes.
Muse,
Yes.
Allen,
Yes.
Eberly,
Yes.
Henry,
Yes.
Lebanese.
I'm surprised that's how it ended up, but that's okay. When you
Hi,
gonna
Artie.
start wearing a center shirt? How many do you have to be given before you start wearing them?